Ciao, sono Riccardo e questo è un nuovo episodio di Actually, il podcast che parla del cambiamento che sembra arrivare piano piano e poi travolgerci tutto d'un tratto. È un episodio speciale, è il primo episodio di CEO Insights, il nostro spin-off dedicato ai grandi CEO da cui cercherei di imparare qualcosa, e per questa occasione I'll switch to English, vado in inglese, because we have our very first CEO of our new spin-off series. He is the Chief Executive Officer of a company called AirBnb. Thanks for being here with us at the show, Mr. Brian Chesky. Ciao, Brian.
Thank you for having me on today. Exciting.
So, couple of hot few days now. You're coming from Torino. I heard you rocked Torino. Is not that easy to rock Torino, you know? Like,
is it? It's not easy?
No, I mean, like they're considered to be pretty cold, you know.
Oh, really?
Torino. I mean, it's not Naples, okay?
It's not Naples.
Yeah, it's not Naples. So it's not that easy. I listened for sure at your interview, your fireside chat with John Elkann. So no pressure on me. The last conversation you had was with Mr. John Elkann. Now you're with Richi Haupt. He's pretty much a big guy here in Italy.
Yes, exactly.
As you probably noticed. So where to begin? I thought a lot about where to start. And the thing is, I know a lot of stuff about you and your company because our company got founded by Alessandro, who is a former employee at AirBnb. So cool. You met him. And so we kind of got brainwashed with your stories, your culture, your core values. Like our company breathes a lot of your values, and I know many of these stories, and I said, okay, probably the best way to introduce you and your company is to start with the story for me. So what does Airbnb have to do with 2 boxes of cereals?
So maybe I'll tell you the quick story of the cereal boxes. October 2007, my roommate or my friend from RISD, Joe, says, come to San Francisco. I have this moment in my life where it's like everything in front of me, this road looks like the road behind me. And I make a decision that's about to change my life forever. I come to San Francisco. I get there. The rent is $1,150. And I have a problem. I can't pay rent. And it turns out that weekend, an international design conference is coming to San Francisco. And all the hotels in San Francisco are sold out. And that's when we had an idea. What if we can turn our house into a bed and breakfast for the conference? I didn't have any beds, but Joe had 3 air beds. We called it Air Bed and Breakfast. So we built this site, Air Bed and Breakfast. We launched it, and we had like 3 guests use it. We go away for the holidays. We're not really sure. We're going to keep working on it. We recruit our 3rd co-founder, Nate, who's a software engineer. So Joe and I were designers. And we build this website. Air Bed and Breakfast. We build more like a platform, and we launch at this conference that a lot of tech companies used to launch at, including Twitter, called South by Southwest. And we launch in March of 2008, and we get 2 bookings, and I was one of the 2 bookings. So we have no traction. We're at this point we build another version of the website, and we launch. Like we're thinking how are we going to get there's a chicken and egg problem. They call it the chicken and egg. Like people don't want to put their homes in Airbnb unless they're going to get bookings from travelers. But travelers don't want to come to Airbnb if there's no homes. You see, it's like what comes first, the homes or the guest? And what we realized is you had to get them at the same time. But how are you going to get them at the same time? You need a forcing function, and you need to get guests and hosts in the same city at the same time, and they need to have a need that you're solving that's obvious. And it turns out that weekend, the first weekend, was an event, a conference. So it's 2008, it's summer, and we ask ourselves, what's the biggest event in America? And at that time, then Senator Barack Obama was running for president. He was nominated to be president. It was a huge movement, kind of like a huge young youth movement across the country, and people under the age of 30 or under 25, they really resonated. The message of the campaign was hope, but it had a grassroots feel to it. So a lot of people made what was almost like a political pilgrimage to Denver. They came to Denver, and they had a rally, and they decided to move the rally from a 20,000 seat arena to a 60,000 seat football stadium. All of a sudden, people asked, where are they going to stay? Mm-hmm. The big news programs are housing crisis. And that's when we realized we can provide housing for the Democratic National Convention. So we launched for the Democratic National Convention the third time. And with the first time, we got 3 bookings. The second time, we got 2 bookings. This time, we got like maybe, I don't know, 80 bookings maybe. Let's be generous. And we realized we made it. We're huge. At this point, I thought we were like a major rock band. We just made it on the scene. And the following weekend, the Republican convention came. I think we had like a few bookings. And the weekend after that, we had like very few bookings. We realized if only there were like political conventions like Denver every week, we'd have a business. We have no business. So along the way, I'll get the story, Cyril, it's just coming up. Along the way, we get introduced to a bunch of investors, probably like, 20. And Joe and I and Nate, but really Joe and I were trying to raise money. We're trying to raise $150,000 at a $1.5 million
valuation.
Post money, I think. Money, I'm not mistaken, valuation.
1.5, okay.
Million, not 15 million, not 1.5 billion, but million. So for $150,000, you could have owned 10% of the company. And we were not successful. I got numerous rejection emails, people saying like, this is not the right market for you. So Joe and I were basically just funding the company with credit cards. We would take a credit card with maybe like a $5,000 max. We'd max it out, take another credit card, max it out. So at this point, we've been working on the concept for almost a year. We've maxed out tens of thousands of dollars of credit cards. We're not getting investors. The economy is now slowing down. The recession's right in front of us. And we're like, we have this company, AirBnb Breakfast, and the Airbirds aren't working. Maybe breakfast will work. I know what you're thinking. Of course, breakfast. And so we started thinking like about making Barack Obama themed cereal boxes because we created housing news. Now the election was coming up. So we asked ourselves, and this was mostly just for fun. We asked ourselves like, well, what would a Barack Obama themed cereal be called? And I think it was kind of obvious. He had that big O.
Yeah.
And, for Obama, and that looks like a Cheerio. So we called it Obama O's. Then our tagline was the breakfast of hope. And it was like this kind of cool cereal box that we designed. But then we're like, we don't want to be we want to be nonpartisan. Airbnb is about bringing people together of all political aisles and views and demographics. So we wanted to have a John McCain themed cereal. And he was running for the Republican nominee. Now, Obama's box was blue because that's the color of the Democratic Party. John McCain's box was red. And we found out, I remember reading like his Wikipedia, and he was a captain in the Navy.
Yeah,
so
pretty famous.
I said, like he's Captain McCain. It's like Captain Crunch. So we called it Captain McCain's, a maverick in every bite. So we have these cereal boxes, and we want them to look like it's one thing to like have an idea like cereal, but the key is to execute anything, even a joke, execute it with a level of seriousness of crap. So we found like a professional photographer who photographs food, professional illustrators. We designed the overall concepts, and we kind of art directed it and had people design the boxes. So now we have designs of these boxes, but we don't have a way to make them. I remember Joe's like calling like Kellogg's and General Mills, like, hey, we want to get like 100, 200,000 boxes of cereal made. And they're like, he's like, hello. They're not picking up. So he finds a guy who went to RISD, alumni, who's living across the bay in Berkeley, California. And he says to us, and we said, by the way, we have no money. So like, we want you to print the boxes. We have no money. Can you help us out? And the guy, we'll pay you back. And the guy says, I can't print like 100,000 boxes of cereal, but I'll do you a favor. I'll for free. I will print 1,000 boxes, 500 each of Obama's and Cat McCain's. And if you sell them, just give me a small royalty to compensate me for my cost. So we said, awesome, great. So we get 1,000 boxes of cereal. But the problem is, I didn't realize they weren't assembled. Like, cereal boxes, you got to like fold them and glue them together. They're boxes. Well, these weren't boxes. These were flat pieces of cardboard. So now we had to like fold 1,000 boxes of cereal, hot glue them, and then we had to put cereal in them because there was no cereal. So Joe and I literally went to the grocery store and bought 1,000 boxes of cereal at the grocery store. We went to this really cheap grocery store. And so now we have these 1,000 boxes of cereal stacked in our apartment. So now what do we do? Like, how are we going to get the word out? Well, this is the last part of the story. I remember having two conversations. One, I was having a conversation with one of my friends who had a startup, and he bought like this thing called a media list. I don't know if they still exist, but back in 2008, there were media lists you could buy where you could basically get people's even their like mailing address, like a reporter, like this producer at Good Morning America, and this is their mailbox, and you can send them something. And now I don't know. I guess now it's just like a directory of their emails, and you'd email them, but they might not check it. So I get this like media list from them. But I remember having a conversation with a producer I'd pitched a few months earlier, and I was trying to pitch him a story, and he's like, I don't have time to listen to this. And I said, can I email you? And remember him saying, I get like 800 emails a day. He might have been exaggerating, or maybe he wasn't. But I remember thinking, like, if I email a bunch of reporters that I have all these cereal boxes, they might not notice. So I got their mailing addresses, or Joe and I did. And we took 100 boxes of cereal, 50 Obama O's, 50 Captain McCain's. We took 10% of our inventory, and we reserved 10% for marketing. So, it's good. It's good if you take 10% of your cost, put into marketing. And we mailed the boxes of cereal to all these reporters. It was in this beautiful, like that we made together box. It was like with foam that we had cut out. And I remember thinking, you might get 800 emails every day, but you're not going to get 800 boxes of cereal on your desk. So people go in the newsroom. They take the cereal boxes out of the box. They put them on their desk. And then people would be like, what are those? In the newsroom, right? People are walking by. And they're like, can I do a story about them? So people started doing stories about these. All of a sudden, we were on like CNN, Good Morning America. We're in these different magazines. Katy Perry, the musician, did a promotion about them, like a video with Perez Hilton. So we ended up selling all the Obama O's and not all the Cat McCain's. We started giving a discount to get both of them.
How much do you make?
We made a $25,000, $30,000 probably, something like that.
Okay.
And it was enough money to start to pay off our debt. So we didn't have money, but we had a little bit of cash flow, and we were able to pay down a bit of our debt. But I also the key to the story was that I think it demonstrated a level of hustle to investors because it gave us confidence. Because a little bit later, we ended up interviewing at Y Combinator, and Paul Graham kind of famously did not love the idea for Airbnb because it seemed crazy. But I think he and Jessica loved the scrappiness. They thought we were in an investment nuclear winter. It's the Great Recession. And we were like cockroaches. We were unkillable. And the demonstration of that was that we were selling collectible breakfast cereal. And it became a bit of a mythology. So we ended up saying we're like serial entrepreneurs, a spin on people that start a lot of companies. Serial entrepreneur in this case was somebody who's just really scrappy and always finds a way. And I think the point, it really does demonstrate entrepreneurship. A lot of people think they need a lot of resources. They need a lot of money. They need a lot of professionalism. They need a lot of experience. The reality is, with enough resourcefulness, creativity, and determination, with scant resources, you can get quite a lot done. And in fact, it's sometimes better to not have a lot of resources. We can talk about that, but...
Yeah, the importance of scarcity and importance of being a great designer, because both of you were designers, and this helped you a lot at the
we had
beginning.
A sensibility. And by the way, when I started Airbnb with Joe and Nate, I remember people used to think designers don't start companies.
Yeah, I can't imagine Y Combinator, just taking guys.
It was an outlier because Paul Graham said that Y Combinator was for hackers.
Yeah.
Although he wrote a book, Hackers and Painters. And Joe and I were closer to painters than hackers. Although we always saw ourselves the intersection. We've been described as non-technical, and Nate was technical. But I think a lot of people describe non-technical as a business person. And I think that we were a designer is not technical like an engineer, but they're not non-technical like a business person. You are close to the product, and you are a necessary form of the product if a consumer ever experiences it. And, Joe and I had worked with engineers for a while. So, yeah, but it was great.
Yeah. I mean, this story, I know the story pretty well, but it's so cool to hear it directly from you. Thanks, Ale, for your teaching us of this story, because it's a very inspiring one. I go now. back to Brian as an individual, okay? Now, some numbers about your company, but then we go to you. Airbnb 2022. Now, I don't have the numbers for 2023. 8.3 billion in revenues, 400 million nights and experiences booked in 2022. 14K is the average income from Airbnb from the typical host in the US. More than 100,000 cities where you operate, market capitalization around 80, 90 billion, don't know today, but you hit like 130 billion at some point in 2022. Moreover, you have like 100 of new regulations targeting your company every day. Activists say you're good or bad. It depends. And the CEO, tell me, you wake up in the morning, you need to manage all this stuff here. What do you do? Your daily routine. How does it work?
That's a great question. Well, that assumes I'm in San Francisco. So the last two, so I'm in San Francisco probably, let's say, an average of like, call it 2.5 weeks a month. So like maybe like 1 month I'm in San Francisco, 3 weeks. The other I'm there like 2 weeks. So now that I'm not in San Francisco, I've been traveling around. I was in London, Paris, Turin, Milan, and it's a pretty packed day. And when I'm here, and I'll get to San Francisco in a second, when I'm here, I visit our offices, meet hosts. I sometimes meet policymakers, regulators, government officials, and of course do interviews, try to get the word out.
At the very beginning of your day, you wake up, you read, you work out.
Well, let's talk about San Francisco then. That's probably a better routine. So I wake up. My hours are typically late. So I'll typically go to bed at 2 a.m.
Okay, that's late.
And I typically get up at 9 or maybe 8:30. And maybe I'll get to bed at 1:30 or 2:30, get up at 8:30, 9:30. So I try not to start my day first meeting before 10. I'm just a late person, and I found, everyone's got like different circadian rhythms, and I'm pretty late. I also do a lot of really good thinking between like, say, 9 and 8 p.m. and like midnight or so. So that's where there's a stillness. So I wake up. I've tried not, I kind of check my phone, which I've tried to stop doing. Mm-hmm. But I'll typically check text messages, emails, maybe like messages on Twitter or something like that. I wake up. If I'm being disciplined, I will wake up and I'll do like cardio in the morning at the gym or a Peloton in my room. I have a Peloton and I'll do like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So that's if I'm being disciplined in the most idealistic scenario. Then I'll get upstairs and sorry, I should clarify, like maybe 3 days a week, I might go into the office when I'm in San Francisco. And like usually Mondays, I don't go in the office. So if I'm working from home and I live alone, except I have a golden retriever named Sophie, I wake up and I'll, feed her. I'll take her on a walk. We live right near a park, so I'll do that. And I'll typically make breakfast, and that's when I'll start like kind of reading. And this is before the first meeting might start. I usually, so I'll probably read, and like the combination of things are I'll read like kind of, whether it's like key selected articles from a stream on Twitter or like some publications, and or maybe I'm like reading like a chapter of a book, something there. I might do some heads down writing. Then, and I'll make coffee. Then around like, let's say 10 o'clock is probably my first meeting. Now, even when I go in the office, I might go in at 11 or 12, so I'll often take the first meeting or two from home, just kind of because I kind of like to drag out of bed, do cardio, and then just like start drinking coffee and start working. Mm-hmm. So then I'll probably do like a couple hours of Zooms. Then maybe I'll then shower and then get ready, go to the office. Let's say this is the day I'm going to the office. So I'll go to the office, and then I'll do, obviously, mostly meetings. Now, if I'm doing heads down work, I'll usually do it from home. Okay. I don't ever go to the office and do something heads down. Like heads down is like I need to write a letter to somebody, or I have to think really deeply about something. So if I want to be focused, heads down, I won't go to the office. I'll stay home.
Do you still design product? Like, do you still take time to think about how to improve your product as a designer?
Yeah, I don't. I'm not in Figma. I'm no longer in like the files. But two things. I I sometimes on my own do a little bit of wireframing, but I don't really share a lot of that with the team. Usually I'm like thinking about the product and I'm writing notes.
Okay.
Now, the other thing is I have a notepad and I keep a daily journal. So every single day I mark the day, like September 27th, and I'll write just notes, like bullet points, notes that come to me. Now, this is really important process, and people will be very surprised to hear this. I'll write notes, every idea, like just anything I'm thinking. I'll just like write notes, bullet points every day. And then I create a diary for each month. So there's my September diary, my October diary. So every day there are notes, ideas. Then the end of every week or every month, I'll read all my notes and I'll bold key ideas. The bold ideas are ideas that have seem in hindsight like important. Then I'll take those bold ideas and they'll go into a to-do list or into some other document where I'm processing. Then I take those ideas and I try to find patterns. But you understand, the amount of ideas I typically write, it's about 100,000 a year.
No way.
100,000.
Or how many step into the to-do?
Sorry, when I say 100,000, it's probably 100,000 lines, like bullets.
That's a very interesting
Maybe
number.
50,000. I know, like, you know, if you take like a novel like Catcher in the Rye, that's 70,000 words. And I most definitely like write significantly more output than Catcher. I mean, it's not good writing. It's just like da-da-da-da-da. It's just notes. But it's definitely, you know, like a good day will be at least 1,000 words a day probably. Okay. And so that's like 300,000 words a year. And again, the words are repetitive. It's like, we should do this. And then I'll say it again, we should do this. So you start to, it's just whatever's coming to your mind. Then sometimes you'll write things. And that's a very important way I've started to organize my thinking. And that's kind of how I design. And then when I want to work on something, then I'll turn it into a document. Okay. All designs start with words. This is actually something Johnny also taught me, Johnny Ive. He says all design starts with words.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay.
Yeah, all design starts with words. Even a product. He doesn't actually start with drawing. He starts with words. So, and this is, I think, unusual, but I think I would recommend for designers that design starts with words. Then you move into the most native form as quickly as possible, you know, like, and usually for me, I usually stop at words. Mm-hmm. So most designers will take the words and then they'll make. Okay. I have designers, so I'll take the words and express them, and then they will. So the handoff is words to them. Okay. Now, when I was 26, you know, I wouldn't have had designers. I would have taken it the next step. So then, what I'm involved is and then they design, and then I do a weekly or bi-weekly or quarterly review. So it usually starts with words. Not all the ideas start with me, and then I'll do editing. I'd be like, oh, I like this. I don't like that. Let's try this. What do you think of that? So there's just the editing process. Anyway, back to my schedule. I'm almost done. I'll also, I'll do Zooms or meetings into the evening, like 7 o'clock. Then I'll have dinner. And then I usually train at 8 p.m. with a personal trainer who is like a bodybuilder. And we train like 4 days a week. And then I get home 9 or 9:30. Sometimes my parents come over and have dinner. They live down the other side of the city. And then I'll usually like either use that time for personal calls to friends. If I'm home in San Francisco, I don't usually go out, and then, or I'll work. And that's when I do my like most important writing and ideas, from like, you know, like 9:30 to 12:30. And then I'll start to unwind at like 1:30. Okay. So that's my schedule.
That's a very fascinating schedule, but, it pretty much brings me to my next question. I mean, I just stepped up as a CEO. I was head of strategy at the company here that I always did various things in my life, but I was never the head of a company, of a community. We're a community as a business, but also as a people working together. And I realized that now it's 3 months I'm doing this job. I realized how lonely that spot is. Like you feel, I mean, I feel lonely. I have my girlfriend. I have a lot of friends. I don't have security nowadays, so I'm pretty free to do everything I want. But I felt immediately that I became lonelier at some point. You're the CEO of a huge company. What's your relationship with loneliness? Do you feel lonely?
Sometimes I less than I did, but let me tell you a story. I was probably when I started Airbnb, it was like a family or like a group of close friends. I was living with Joe. We were totally working together 24/7. And I wouldn't say I was that lonely. And then we started hiring people. Well, Nate joined, then we hired people. And initially, they were like our friends. They were our coworkers and our friends. And I didn't think of myself as the boss. When you're 10 people and you're the founder, you are kind of the boss. Yeah. But you're all young. You've never managed before. You're not very authoritative. There's not really a chain of command. The whole organization is flat. Yes, you might be the decision maker. You don't have a lot of power. They're not really intimidated by you. There's not a huge power imbalance. You're all kind of broke. Like no one's really wealthier people except on paper. I mean, actually, you could hire people with more money than you. So there's not like you don't have all the things I would have now, right? You can go out, you can like drink with them because you're all young and like, you don't really think about like, oh wait, like it wouldn't be weird for the boss to like go to a bar and have a drink with the employee because you're 25 years old and your friends and the company is maybe not even like it's barely incorporated, right? It's like more of a hobby. So with friends, you go out, you drink, and so because of that, you like hang out with your friends. And so your coworkers are also your friends. And in some ways, it's like 50% work and 50% friends, or 70% work, 30% friends. Now, this is different. If a person who's 40 starts a company and they have a family and they're a different life stage, they usually are much more professional. I don't mean that in a purely good way. There's more boundaries. It's more a job. Yeah. But when you're young, you're not just seeking to build a company. Here's the thing people miss. A lot of young people aren't just trying to build a company to create a great product and be successful. They're also trying to build a social life. They're also trying to build a community. And what a startup does initially is it builds that community. And that's, by the way, one of the most fulfilling things is building the community. But then something happens. You get successful. And as you get successful, now you actually become the boss because you have lots of people. And the people that were your family, some of them leave the company, or you have to, layer them with more seasoned management. So your friends become further removed from you. The people you hire are older. Many of them as families. So if they have a family, they're not hanging out with you on the night or weekends, they're with their family. And then suddenly the company's valuation grows and there is actually an economic and power disparity. Now you actually have a lot more money. Now there's a power imbalance. Now you're the CEO. Now maybe they've seen you in podcasts, they've heard about you. And so when they meet you, they're a little nervous. And, they're not as, so there's, and as you get bigger, you are more cautious about, how you show up in employee events. You want to, set a good example. And, people see you kind of differently, like less like a friend and more like like a adult, like a parental figure almost. Mm-hmm. Even if you're younger than them, they project that authority onto you. So the entire thing starts changing. You start getting in the eye of the storm. All this pressure starts happening. And you end up having an experience that most people in your life can't relate to unless they're co-founders. So you call your friends and you complain about your life and they're like, oh man, it's so bad. They don't really know what you're talking about. And so, because they've never lived it, right? They can have compassion, but it's hard to have total empathy when you haven't walked in the shoes. And also their advice is sometimes useful, but sometimes it's just like, well, there's not a common experience. And in Silicon Valley, we're not as communal as an industry. Well, maybe we are. Maybe the new generation is. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's sometimes we've really worked hard to be friends with each other. But for a period of time, I didn't really spend a lot of time with other founders. Okay. And so we were all on our own isolated journey. And then work got more and more intense, more and more intense, more and more intense. And eventually your identity and the identity company become the same thing. So at some point, am I Brian Chesky or the Airbnb guy? And I'm kind of the Airbnb guy. And so you see how this all happens. And so at one point, you get to a point where you were a bunch of friends saying you want to climb a mountain, and now you're at the top of the mountain and you feel a little more by yourself. You may not, if the company's been completely all-consuming, made time for your personal life, but you've gone to achieve this mountain. And for us, our goal wasn't to go public, but it was a symbol. It was a symbol that we kind of have achieved, at least to some extent, what we were trying to achieve. And you get to the top of that mountain and you realize, maybe you weren't even as happy as you were when you started the process, even though you feel much more fulfilled. And the reason why for me was because I was totally isolated, and that actually a lot of happiness is who you do it together with. And I was sheltered in place in a pandemic on Zoom 24/7. I actually was happy when I was working and there was a crisis. I had a purpose, but then, people wanted to go back to their families. And I'm like, wow, I have to rebuild a social life. I have to rebuild friendships, and they can't just be on the basis of work. Because then, and so that whole thing was something I had to go through, and it began a long journey. And so now I would say I'm mostly not, but loneliness, just to be clear, I used to think loneliness was something that old people experience. Mm-hmm. And I also think a lot of people don't want to admit loneliness because they feel like it's going to make them seem pathetic. Oh, they're whining or complaining about being lonely. Here's the reality. All loneliness is you just saying, I get less connection than I desire. And a lot of people subconsciously get less connection than they desire. So the reality is many people are feeling a little lonely and they don't realize it. I would say a large percent of us, if you're watching, probably had some periods of loneliness during the pandemic, and you might not even realize that's what you were feeling. And loneliness is a precursor to anxiety. Mm-hmm. It's a precursor to addiction. It can be a precursor to depression, sadness, and also can be a precursor to hate, because you can become more vigilant. In fact, a lot of people join hate groups to experience belonging. That's one of the number one reasons they do. And so you could think of loneliness as disconnection, as we're designed as creatures to have rich bonds. And modern life can occasionally separate or fray those bonds. And just like mass industrialized food can have effects on our body, the mass industrialized kind of social complex, the digitization of physical communities, if we're not careful and we only live in a digital realm and we don't make time for our family and our friends, then that can make us sad and we don't even realize it.
Well, that's powerful and useful for someone in my position, but I guess also for many people listening to what we're saying. I unfortunately need to jump to some other questions now. Probably now going back briefly to your business. I mean, in 2021, as in 2020, you experienced, a dramatic phase in some days, I guess. No, so the industry, the tourism industry goes from 100 to 0 from one day to the other. You told many times how you reacted, and your company was probably the most resilient one of the most resilient one during the pandemic. I was reading one of the interviews you released in 2021 to my favorite journal in the world, who is Derek Thompson from The Atlantic. You had a beautiful chat. And for the very first time, I read the term workation. So this idea of work and vacation. So this was the time when work-life balance, no, wait. Everything is coming together, also given by the fact that the space that you live is more or less the same, because you can work by your house, your place, for so on. So this was a very strong push that we experienced during the pandemic and probably in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic. Now the question is, now 2023, do you still believe that this is the future? Because in the US there's a lot of talking, but not just in the US. Remote working, smart working, maybe it's better to work from the office. People are lonely when they work from home and so forth. Do you still think the future of work-life balance is something close to workation?
I would describe it as this. Before the pandemic, people generally went to the office 5 days a week, and then they took business trips infrequently, and they took a vacation. Then during the pandemic, people could be sheltered in place. They did their job from a laptop. And it made no difference where that laptop was, so they could work from anywhere. And that was probably the peak of people being nomadic, kind of on their own, working from anywhere. I don't think we're ever going to go to either world fully again. I don't think we're ever going to go back to 5 days a week or even 4 days a week. And I don't know if we're ever going to have another experiment where people are just hopping around home to home on laptops. I think the world's going to be kind of in between. I think the future is flexible. I actually think people are going to be extremely nomadic. Just think about the history of human beings, not to go into a deep history, but our DNA has kind of ceased to evolve that much in the last maybe 200,000 years. Like we're genetically not that different than people 200,000 years ago. We started farming like, I don't know a lot, like 13,000 years ago maybe. So that basically means that we are in our DNA, we're biologically like designed to want to not be in one place all the time, right? We know a civilization came from agriculture, but we're actually like kind of, I think humans are kind of hunter-gatherers at heart. It's why we want to travel. I mean, if you think what is the most aspirational activity or thing in the world, some people might say music. It might actually be travel. If you ask people all the money in the world, what would you do? Most people would say travel.
Yeah.
When you get married, you travel on honeymoon. When you graduate, you travel on a gap year. When you retire, the number one desire of people when they retire is travel. Some of the most shared photos on Instagram and TikTok are travel photos. Travel taps into this desire, this dream. It taps into this sense of possibility. So first of all, I think people are always going to want to travel. Here's another thing I've learned. I had an insight on this trip. People say that the reason to go to an office is because you get more in-person connection than Zoom. And I agree with that. I actually think Zoom is much more productive and effective for many types of tasks. I think it's very efficient. I think that being physically together is very productive for other types of tasks. I think that if an office didn't exist, would we invent it? And if we invented it, will we call it an office? And what would it be? If it didn't exist, I don't think we call it an office. And I am certain it wouldn't look anything like anyone's office today. So you see, we are stuck with these anachronistic form factors, and we need to imagine the office of the 21st century. But here's the other insight I had. I came on this trip to Europe. I was in London, I was in Paris, Turin, and Milan. And 4 or 5 of my employees, team members came with me. Now I've gone to the office with them. I've been on Zoom with them. And I can tell you that a way to get to know your employees 10 times better than going to an office with them is to travel with them. 10 times better. If anyone thinks that being in an office with somebody is a good way to get to know them, go travel with them. It will 1 week of traveling is like 6 months in office or maybe a month in office. And so I do think that the future is more flexible. I think that you're not going to have every core company limiting talent to a commuting radius around their office. You're going to have people being more nimble, people being more like flexible. You're going to have a lot more offsites, a lot more different gatherings. You're going to have a lot more people traveling together. So they will go to office, but not as frequently. They will work from home when need to be heads down. People who go to an office might work remotely over the summer where they want to be somewhere near the beach, or for 6 weeks in the winter while skiing. They might work with other people more frequently. They might go to different offices for a month here or there. So I think the future is not simple. The future is an extremely flexible world where people are not tethered. Imagine like we had this cord tethering us. The cord has been cut, and now people can go anywhere.
Wow, that's quite an answer to my question. I'll move to probably the most delicate part of your business, and I want to hear from you personally. How do you interpret also the social cost of your business? Okay, we're here in Milan. Milan is one of the fastest growing cities in Europe, and as every fast growing city, we are experiencing here a kind of an issue with the cost of living. This affects particularly younger generations, off-site students. We call them here studenti fuori sede. We have a lot of them. They dialogue a lot with our community because we mainly speak with youngsters. And I asked many of them during the past couple of weeks, what would they ask you? And then I said, I mean, it's pretty easy. I would just say, if you had here in front of yourself an off-site student coming from southern Italy who is kind of being pushed back from this city, and he thinks that Airbnb is part of the cause of his problem, of him being kicked out of the place where he is. What would you say to him to convince him? Or I'm not sure if you need to convince him, but what would you say to him as an individual?
Maybe we'll start with the big picture and work down to the details. First of all, we want to strengthen the communities we're in. we're not trying to drive locals out of a city. In fact, the whole idea of Airbnb is to experience a city like a local. And in order for that to happen, you need locals in a city. Airbnb is not designed to make a city less affordable. In fact, it was originally designed to make people's housing more affordable. Hence, we couldn't pay rent. I'm staying with a host here in Milan, and she, it's her actual house. But she has another home that she lives in. And so she kind of goes between these two homes. She describes not wanting to have a full-time tenant in there. And so, this is a way for her to make extra income and be able to support her family. 20%, by the way, of our stays are longer than 30 days. So we're not exclusively short-term. But let me just go through all the different objections. First of all, if a city is expensive at the highest level, the major reason a city is expensive is because more people are moving to a city than they have housing for. The number one solution at the highest level is for the cities to build more housing, that there is not enough Airbnbs or any type of housing that exists to probably fulfill the demand of a fast-growing city. It is, for a variety of reasons, gotten more difficult to build housing in cities. And I think that you need to look at a metric. How many people every year move to a city and how many units are built? And if the number of people moving to a city is higher than the units built, then the prices will go up. And you have to look at the incentive system. Does anyone benefit from housing prices go up? It actually turns out that people who own property could. And so you need to look at making sure that interests are aligned. Now, at the Airbnb level, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I can't say we're always part of the solution, because when you build something and you put it in the hands of 100 million people, they're going to use it for unintended consequences. So let's start with the objections. We'll start with the one that you said. If people are concerned about hosts taking housing units off the market, then what we've done in different cities is we've worked with the city who've had a concern about housing and said, let's build a registration system. Let's build a system where every host has to register, and then you can decide what the nature activity is. In Paris, they said, we don't want housing taken off the market, so we're going to limit hosts to renting 120 days a year. And that means that the other 2/3 of the year, so it's 1/3 of the year, they have to essentially live there. This creates a proxy for permanent residency. And if it's a proxy for permanent residency, there's a very low likelihood that in many ways you'd believe that unit would be taken off the market. But every city deals with this differently. We've had cities come up with entirely different solutions. We've also had some criticism that Airbnb doesn't pay hotel taxes. Well, actually, over a decade ago, we started working with cities to collect remit taxes. This is really difficult to do. But now, in thousands of jurisdictions around the world, we've collected remitted hotel tax, I think $5 billion, one of the biggest collectors. Then people said, well, we don't like all the nuisance in our neighborhood. So we started verifying the identity of every single guest. And if they misbehave, we ban them from the platform. They can't come back, presumably as a new identity. Then, to stop parties, we built an AI-powered reservation technology screening tool to try to block parties. And we believe, since we've rolled this tool out in May, we've stopped over 300,000 attempted parties on
Party
Airbnb.
poopers.
Exactly. So here's the key point. At the most fundamental level, I think cities, obviously, if they're popular, should be building more housing. That being said, Airbnb has to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. The way we're part of the solution is we listen to cities. If they have a housing crunch, then we will work with them to put restrictions in place. If those restrictions don't work, we'll revisit those restrictions. And we try to always think of every problem as something we can design for. You have this problem, let's design this thing. Does it work? Then we get the data. The last thing I'll just say to this person or to anyone listening is I think that you have to look at the benefits of Airbnb both economically and socially. The economic benefit you mentioned is that hosts are earning thousands of dollars a year. For every $1,500 spent in the world, $1 approximately is spent on Airbnb. And that's important because more than half of our hosts are women. Many of these people use Airbnb to stay in their home. In fact, many of the surveys we've done, more than half the hosts say they depend on Airbnb to stay in their home, to pay their rent or pay their mortgage. So it's possible if they weren't hosting, they would have had to move out and a landlord would have reclaimed the house upgraded the property and it would have been more expensive anyway. We don't know, right? There's a lot of theories that could have happened. The other thing is that there's, I think, good social impact. There could be social downsides, but there are social upsides, including making a city more affordable for people to visit when they're traveling, or I think ultimately the most important thing, bringing people together. Having a local experience of a city, not experiencing it through a hotel district, getting a local lens. I think these are principles are really important. But again, the designer in me doesn't want to think of a product as good or bad. It wants to think of it as a design that needs to be optimized based on complaints.
Going to the ending of this conversation, and I'm so sorry we need to close it. Before going to the last question, I'd like to bring you also in another debate we have here in Italy. It's a very strange debate, and it's not just here in Italy. It's around over-tourism. This topic you might have listened probably or heard something about it. We as a country rely a lot on tourism, and we always looked for more tourism. Now we started talking about over-tourism. Are you part of the problem, do you think? Or again, can you be a solution to this thing?
We can be a problem or a solution. Again, we are a tool, and so the tool can be used for good or it can be used in a way that people don't like. So let's talk about over-tourism and how we can be part of the solution. Because again, we always want to be part of solutions. So let's start with the word over-tourism. It's like there's too much tourism in the world. Is there over-tourism at a global level? Is there just too much tourism in the world? I would say no. So here's what I would say. In 1950, 50 million people crossed the border of a country to travel. Before the pandemic, that was over 1 billion guest arrivals, international arrivals, where they crossed the border. Travel as an industry is nearly the size of oil as an industry. It's a very, very important part of the industry. Travel and contact between strangers is how culture happens, how people move, how people experience. It's one of the great joys and desires of people's lives. I think that if people had passports and they traveled to other countries, they'd be more open-minded and we'd have less conflict. I think travel can solve a lot of things in the world. I do not think there's too many people traveling in the world, but I do think when people say over-tourism, they mean something very specific. They mean too many people going to the same place at the same time. So the question is, are there too many people going to the same place at the same time? The answer is absolutely. When I go to Venice, I've been to Florence in a while, but there's certain cities or certain neighborhoods where it just feels like they're ingredients. And you imagine you make an ingredient of a perfect community and you need a certain percent of locals and a certain percent of visitors. If you have too many visitors, it's kind of like a museum or a Disneyland. If you have too many locals and no visitors, you may not have enough economic vibrancy. And also extremely insular cultures are sometimes not super open-minded, and that might cause problems too. So you want this perfect balance. So how would one do that? Well, first of all, we want to be part of the solution. Hotels are not in 100,000 cities, and we are. And the reason why is a hotel cannot – I'm from Niskayuna, New York, a little town. And to my knowledge, I don't think there's a hotel in Niskayuna, New York. There's not many because we're a 20,000 person town. Why would you have a hotel? But there's Airbnbs there. So Airbnbs are much more distributed. We're much more distributed. The second thing is people typically stay in hotels for 2-3 days. In Airbnb, they almost half the time stay in Airbnbs for over a week, or at least half of our nights are over a week. So they stay there longer. In hotels, people typically go to a hotel district. There's one district. So they're cramming in one district. In Airbnbs, they typically stay kind of everywhere. But the real solution I would like is for people not to go to the same 50 or 100 cities. I remember I was in France once. I met the Minister of Tourism, and he said, we want to get people to not come to Paris, but to come to other parts of France. And I thought to myself, well, why are all these people going to Paris? Partly it's awesome. But the bigger reason everyone's going to Paris is because Americans asked them to name 10 other places in France. And so we need to popularize other destinations and spread them out. And we need to spread out dates. So what we've done to try to be part of the solution, again, I'm a designer and design-led company. We try to think, well, how can we help be part of the solution? We basically said, let's get people to be more flexible about their destinations. So we created this date picker that says, I'm flexible. If you say you're flexible, we'll show you other times you can travel. And if you travel other times, you're going to probably save money. So there's an economic benefit to being flexible and spread out tourism. The next is we try to move away from a fill in the blank. If you give people a fill in the blank to type in a place, they're going to only type in 10 places: Rome, Paris, Milan, London, New York, LA, and everyone's going to go to some places. But if you allow people to browse, they might discover a home in a city they never thought to type in a map. And so that's what we want to do. Over time, I think we can be part of the solution by redistributing travel. And that is definitely our vision. I do think there is such a thing as too many people going to the same place at the same time. I think that's also partly an infatuation with mass tourism, an infatuation with like standing in front of a landmark, taking a selfie, wanting to like take a photo of the Mona Lisa because it's famous. And I think that last thing I'll say, the word tourism, to my knowledge, comes from the word grand tour. Grand tour was this thing that happened, I think, in the 17th century, where aristocratic men, typically from England or London, would take a sojourn for a couple years down to Italy or France. And they might go to, say, Paris or maybe, I don't know, Venice and study painting for 6 months. And studying painting for 6 months became looking at a painting behind a glass with no context. We become devoid of the social and cultural context sometimes when we travel for why we're traveling. So my vision for traveling is it blends with living, that you're not so much an outsider staying in a hotel district in a mass-produced commodity trail, going the same places everyone else goes, but people spread out along the globe. That's not landmark-driven, it's people-driven. They stay longer, and when they go somewhere, they have a stake in the local community. People are happy that they're there. That would be the way I would design the travel industry if I could. I mean, we're a small percentage of the travel industry, but I think in the next 10 or 20 years, we may be able to help bend it towards this new vision.
Wow. We're done. I'll just steal you a last suggestion, which is two. Do's and don'ts. One do and one don't for someone who is starting to work as a CEO. Something that they really need to do and something that they should never do.
One do. Is to seek out people that you admire to work with and never settle on the people you work with ever, even if you have hundreds of people. I interviewed the first couple hundred people. I spent months just finding our first engineer. Never ever settle on the people. And if that means having a smaller company or taking longer to build your company, it will probably make you happier and you might have a better quality company in the long run. I can give you like 100 do's. That's just one that comes to my mind. So I'm going to give you one don't. I could write a list of don'ts. So it's like, which one do I pick? Don't apologize for who you are or how you want to run the company. When you start the company, you're probably really intuitive. You're probably not getting a lot of advice. You're just doing whatever you think is right. And if you are so lucky to be successful and it works, pretty soon people are going to start talking you out of your intuition. You're going to hire people who bring their way with them. They're going to tell you what they think your vision should be, mostly with good intentions. They're going to make suggestions. And at some point, you can stop listening to your inner voice. You start listening to other people and you get confused. And you also make compromises. You compromise all the time over like how to run the company, what to do. And if that happens, you make enough compromises. One day you wake up and you're like, I don't even recognize what this company is. And I think before the pandemic, in some small way that happened with me, I think I made so many compromises, hiring so many people. I'm not blaming them. I'm taking responsibility. And I did it to make people happy. I was a people pleaser. And by trying to make people happy, actually made no one happy because everyone was in a compromised position. Because if you compromise with everyone, then they all work in a compromised environment. And the moment I did the unpopular thing, mostly out of a crisis, and said, this is what we're doing. And I was extremely clear. It doesn't mean I didn't listen to people, but I had a clarity of vision. We're going to work this way. These are our values. This is what we're going to do. Guess what? The people who stuck around, not everyone stuck around, the people who did were happier. And that's what mattered.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brian Chesky. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.